Johnny Torrio was an Italian-American mobster who played a significant role in the development of organized crime in the United States during the early 20th century. He was born in Italy in 1882 and immigrated to the United States as a child. He is perhaps best known for his association with Al Capone, whom he mentored and helped rise to power in the Chicago outfit. He was a key figure in the Prohibition era, using his strategic mind to establish bootlegging operations and other illegal businesses. Torio retired from the criminal world in late 1925 and is described as an organizer and administrator of underworld affairs and is unsurpassed in the annals of American crime. Torrio was born in Esina, Basilicata, to Tommaso Torrio and Maria Carluccio, who were originally from Altamira, Apulia. His father, a railway employee, died in a work accident when he was only 2 years old. Shortly after, the Torrios immigrated to New York City with his widowed mother in December 1884, who later remarried. In Manhattan, he first worked as a bouncer and porter. He and Robert Vanella, a fellow James Street resident, joined a street gang as teenagers where he rose to the position of leader. He eventually was able to save enough money to open a billiards parlor for the gang, and from there, illegal ventures like loan sharking and gambling grew. Paul Kelly, the head of the 5 Points gang, would later notice Torrio's business acumen. The legitimate businesses that Torrio's gang operated were merely a sideline to the group's primary focus, a numbers game, which was financed by illegal activities like prostitution, opium trafficking, hijacking, and bookmaking. Al Capone, a Kelly's Club employee, admired Torrio's sharp mind and looked up to him as a mentor. Before joining the 5 Points gang, Capone belonged to the Junior 40 Thieves, the Bowery Boys, and the Brooklyn Rippers. At some point, Torio hired Capone to work as a bartender at the Harvard Inn, a bar run by Frankie Yale, a business associate of Torrio's, in the Coney Island section of Brooklyn. Torio was the nephew of Victoria Moresco, Big Jim Colosimo's wife and business partner, who had amassed ownership of more than 100 brothels in Chicago. Torio is also referred to as Colosimo's nephew, but Lawrence Bergreen argues that since there is no proof of this, it is more likely that their kinship was spiritual than familial. Colosimo invited Torio to Chicago in 1909 so he could deal with the Black Hand's extortion demands. He took care of the extortionists but continued to stay on in Chicago, running Colosimo's business and assembling the gangster force required to counter threats. Al Capone moved to Chicago in 1919 and began working as a bouncer and bartender at the Four Deuces, a Colosimo gang hangout at 2222 South Wabash Street. Torio pushed the gang to start bootlegging when Prohibition went into effect in 1920, but Colosimo steadfastly refused. Colosimo and Moresco's divorce was uncontested when it was finalized in March 1920. 1 month later, he and Dale Winter retreated to West Baden Springs, Indiana. Upon their return, he bought a house on the south side. On May 11, 1920, Torio gave Colosimo a call to inform him that a shipment was on its way to the restaurant. Colosimo drove there to wait for it, but was shot in an ambush and killed. As ordered by Chicago outfit friends Torio and Capone, Frankie Yale allegedly traveled from New York to Chicago and personally gunned down longtime gang leader, Big Jim Colosimo. Yale was never formally charged despite being suspected by Chicago police. As a result of his marriage to Winter, Colosimo allegedly went soft, which prevented his gang from making bootlegging profits, which allegedly led to his murder. Another theory puts the shooter as Al Capone. It is also believed that Colosimo's ex-wife, who was dissatisfied with the terms of the divorce, organized the murder. The largest organized crime organization in the city was run by Torio, who had Capone as his right-hand man. He attempted to broker territorial agreements between competing criminal organizations out of concern for getting sucked into gang wars. In 1920, Torio was able to create a cartel that controlled the majority of the bootlegging gangs in Chicago. A member of the bootlegging cartel, the smaller North Side gang led by Dean O'Banion, was of mixed ethnicity. The Jenna brothers, who were associated with Torrio's gang, were discovered to be operating a liquor business in 1924 in territory controlled by the North Side gang. Despite Torrio's claims to be a dispute resolver, when O'Banion went to Torio, he was unhelpful with the Jenna's incursion into the North Side. As a result, the North Side gang retaliated by hijacking beer shipments of the Jennas. O'Banion discovered in May 1924 that the police had set aside a specific night to conduct a raid on the Zeben brewery. Prior to the raid, he approached Torio and requested to sell his ownership stake in the brewery. He claimed he wanted to leave the underworld and move to Colorado. Torio offered to purchase O'Banion's share and gave him $1 million in exchange. The police, including the police chief, raided the brewery the morning of the deal and forced it to close. Torio and O'Banion, amongst others, were put under arrest. Torio was charged with bootlegging, a repeat offense carrying a mandatory sentence of imprisonment. Torio would then realize that O'Banion had conned him and defrauded him of $500,000. Without Mike Merlo, the leader of the Siciliana Labor Union, Torio would have tried to take revenge against O'Banion and the North Side gang immediately. Merlo persuaded Torio to prevent any violence against the North Side gang because he had a personal stake in maintaining harmony among Chicago's gangs. On November 10, 1924, 3 men entered O'Banion Schofield's flowers store pretending to buy flowers for Merlo's funeral after he passed away from cancer on November 8. They then shot O'Banion to death. Frankie Yale, John Scalise, and Albert Anselmi are thought to have carried out the murders while acting on Torrio's behalf. Following O'Banion's death, Jaime Weiss took control of the North Side gang, supported by Vincent Drucci and Bugs Moran. The North Siders made it a top priority to exact revenge on O'Banion's killers because he had been a close friend of Weiss. Capone was ambushed in January 1925. He was unharmed but shaken. 12 days later, Torio and his wife Anna were ambushed outside of their home by Weiss, Drucci, and Moran on January 24. Torio was shot multiple times and was nearly fatal. After recovering, he gave Capone the reins of the gang and fled to New York, effectively resigning. Torio relocated to Italy with his mother and wife in the latter half of 1925, but he no longer engaged in direct mob business. He declared that Capone would have complete control over the outfit. Torio left behind a criminal enterprise that generated about $70 million in revenue annually from prostitution, illegal gambling, and alcohol. As Benito Mussolini started to put pressure on the Italian mafia in 1928, Torio left for the United States. He is credited with aiding in the formation of the Big Seven, a loose cartel of East Coast bootleggers that included Lucky Luciano, Joe Adonis, Frank Costello, and Meyer Lansky. He was also in favor of setting up a national organization to stop the kind of gang turf wars that had erupted in Chicago and New York. His suggestion was well received, and Torio, Lansky, Luciano, and Costello hosted a conference in Atlantic City in May 1929 that resulted in the founding of the National Crime Syndicate. While waiting for a haircut on April 16, 1957, in the Brooklyn neighborhood of New York City, Torio suffered a heart attack. He would die in a nearby hospital a few hours later.